July 20th, 1969. You know the date. It's one of those moments in history that's just burned into our collective memory. Humanity's greatest achievement. But almost from the second it happened, this little shadow of doubt started to creep in. For over 50 years now, the idea that the moon landing was all just an elaborate fake has been floating around. So what's really behind all that doubt? And more importantly, how can we be so sure about what actually happened up there? Well, let's dig into the evidence. Okay, so before we can even talk about the evidence for the landing, we have to understand the skepticism. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It was actually fueled by some really powerful forces at the time. It really boils down to three main things. First, you've got the whole Cold War vibe, which created this massive distrust of the government. Second, the pictures that came back just looked kind of off because they were showing us physics that we just aren't used to seeing. And finally, there's just plain old human nature. When something is this incredible, this monumental, it almost feels too good to be true, so we start looking for other explanations. And this timeline really shows you the pressure cooker they were in. For more than a decade, the US was basically losing the space race. The Soviets launched Sputnik, the first satellite. They put Yuri Gagarin in orbit, the first human being in space. The pressure on the United States to pull off a spectacular win was just immense, which, for some people, made the success of Apollo 11 seem a little suspicious. So with the stakes being that high, you gotta ask the question, how do we know it was real? So let's shift gears now from the why people doubt to the claims themselves. What does the hard evidence actually tell us? A huge number of the conspiracy claims come from people picking apart the Apollo mission photos. I mean, on the surface, they seem to show things that just don't add up. But do they really? Okay, let's break down the big three claims you always hear. First up, why are there no stars? Well, think about it. The cameras were set to capture brightly lit astronauts on a super bright sunlit surface. The faint stars in the background, they were just too dim to get picked up by the exposure. Next, the flag is waving. If you look closely, there's actually a horizontal rod holding the top of the flag out. The ripples you see are just wrinkles from it being unfolded, and with no wind, there's nothing to smooth them out. And those weird shadows going in different directions? The moon isn't a flat studio floor, it's bumpy and cratered, and that uneven ground distorts shadows in the exact same way it does here on Earth. And this quote explains another classic question. Where's the blast crater under the lander? See, on Earth, a rocket engine pushes the air around it, kicking up a huge mess. But in a vacuum, there's no air to push. Only the dust particles that are physically hit by the exhaust get moved. It's a much smaller, way less dramatic effect. So, the takeaway here is that these so-called photographic gotchas aren't smoking guns at all. They're just what happens when light, fabric, and physics behave in a totally alien environment that we're not used to. But, okay, let's move past the pictures. The most powerful proof isn't in images we can argue about. It's in the actual physical stuff. Objects and data that we can still measure and test right here, right now. You see, the Apollo astronauts left things on the moon. They left these special mirrors called retroreflectors, and scientists on Earth still bounce lasers off them today to get a super precise measurement of the moon's distance. We also have amazing high-res photos from modern orbiters that show the landing sites, the rover tracks, and even the astronauts' footprints. But most importantly, they brought stuff back with them. And we're not talking about a few pebbles. The Apollo missions returned 382 kilograms of lunar samples. That's over 840 pounds. We're talking about the weight of a grand piano. Just trying to fake that much material would have been an unbelievable challenge. But that's not even the best part. What's so amazing is we can actually see the entire chain of custody. You can see an astronaut on the moon using special tools to grab a sample, and then you see scientists back here on Earth carefully handling that same kind of rock in a super secure lab to keep it pristine. And this, to me, is the absolute knockout punch. When scientists analyze these rocks, they found they have a unique chemical signature, a kind of geological DNA that is measurably different from any rock found on Earth. These rocks show they were formed in a vacuum, with no water, and that they've been blasted by cosmic rays for billions of years. Those are conditions you just don't find on Earth's surface. And as you can see on this chart, that creates a totally distinct fingerprint. The lunar and terrestrial samples are close, but they are undeniably, measurably different. So here's the bottom line. You can't fake geochemistry. You can't just whip up 382 kilograms of rocks with a non-terrestrial isotopic signature in some Hollywood studio. This isn't just a rock, it's like a receipt from another world, and it's one that's impossible to forge. Okay, and finally, let's talk about what might be the single biggest roadblock for any conspiracy theory: people. The sheer number of human beings that would have had to be in on a secret of this size is just, well, it's staggering. To fake the moon landing, it's not like you just need a few filmmakers. Think about this. You would need to keep about 400,000 scientists and engineers quiet. You'd need 20,000 different companies and universities to all play along. And you would need every single nation on Earth with a radio telescope to pretend they were seeing it too. And look at the mountain of data they'd have to fake. We're talking 11,000 hours of audio from mission control alone. But you know who watched the closest? The Soviet Union. America's #1 rival had every reason in the world and the technology to expose a fraud. But they didn't. They confirmed the landing because their own tracking data told them it was real. Neil Armstrong really said it best. The whole reason for doing something this huge wasn't just about politics. It was about pushing the limits of what's possible. It really speaks to something deep inside us.
When you add it all up, the hundreds of thousands of people, the rival nations, the mountains of data, you get to a very simple, almost funny conclusion. Faking the moon landing would have been way harder, way more complicated than actually just going to the moon.
So let's circle back to that big question from the beginning. Did we really land on the moon? Based on all the evidence we have, the answer is an absolute, unequivocal yes. And this is why it all matters. Our certainty doesn't come from just believing what the government tells us. It comes from real, physical evidence. Those rocks, those mirrors, that scientists from all over the world can still test for themselves today. So in the end, maybe the reason that conspiracy theory is so persistent is because the truth is just so much harder to wrap your head around. The real mystery isn't if we went to the moon. The real mystery is how a bunch of incredibly smart people, using computers that were less powerful than the phone in your pocket, actually managed to pull off something so audacious, so improbable, that even today it still feels a little bit like science fiction.